The chemistry iceberg. I presume that you know how these work, so let's do this. NaCl. This refers to sodium chloride, aka salt. Vitamins. About a dozen compounds that must be ingested with food. They have a lot of different roles, for example vitamin A is needed for seeing. Viruses are not a form of life. Viruses do not have their own metabolism and are not composed of cells, which are the two criteria by which to judge whether something is alive or not. They hijack the metabolism of a cell they infect, they make copies of itself using that cell's metabolism, and then they break the cell down, releasing copies of itself. Alcohol. Well, if there's one term that I don't need to explain, it is probably this one. Soap. Soap is pretty cool, though difficult to get excited about. But the thing is, it breaks down fatty substances into small droplets, which is pretty useful for washing. Also, plasma membranes of bacteria are also made out of fatty substances, so soap is antibacterial too. Superconductors. These are materials which have zero electrical resistance, which I don't know the technical details, but this is a very useful property. Ordinary metals can all become superconductors as their temperature is brought down to the absolute zero, or around that. However, it is super impractical to cool something down to such a low temperature, so all the hope is about finding materials that are superconductors at high temperatures. For now, we've found some substances that become superconductors at about -160 degrees. This is already pretty big, as this temperature can be reached relatively cheaply with liquid nitrogen. However, the search for really high temperature superconductors continues, and only then will they revolutionize everything. Meth. It is a drug made famous by the Breaking Bad series. 4chan chlorine gas incident. Chlorine gas was the first chemical weapon used in World War I. It is relatively easy to make by mixing bleach with an acid. Warning, do not make it at home, it is not a joke, you will kill yourself. A 4chan user famously made a thread where he made chlorine gas to test a gas mask that he bought. While the mask did work and the guy did not dissolve his lungs, he posted getting severe chemical burns on his arms. Nile Red. He is probably the most famous chemistry YouTuber. Transparent wood, supercritical carbon dioxide, and eating impure synthesis products are all things he did over the years. Oil rig is an acronym sometimes taught in high schools. It stands for oxidation is loss, reduction is gain, in parentheses of electrons or electron density. Dissolving flesh in HF refers to hydrofluoric acid, which is, well, able to do that. More specifically, this entry is about a video from another famous chemistry YouTube channel, Periodic Videos, hosted by Albert Einstein, Sir Martin Polyakov. Yeah, in one of their videos they dissolved a chicken leg in HF. Positive refers to another high school acronym. It goes that cations are positive. Get it? Cations? Look, I did not make it up, I swear. Viroids. They take the not being alive thing that viruses had going on for themselves to another level. They are strings of RNA which are able to infect and hijack cells to make copies of themselves. There are no human diseases caused by viroids, but they do cause a lot of plant diseases. Abiogenesis. This is a term that you may learn in high school, and it's about the origins of biological life, like how did all that biological chemistry come out of rocks and water. RNA world is a term related to abiogenesis. Basically, it is highly probable that very early life was based on RNA, or that even it was RNA itself. RNA can store genetic information, so it would have played the role of DNA in early life, and it can also catalyze reactions, so it would have played the role of proteins. There is a lot more to this theory, and I'll just end up saying that it is widely accepted to be true. Benzene causes cancer 100% of the time, so I'm not sure why the number is so high up, but essentially benzene is a very toxic and relatively simple chemical. It is well known to cause cancer. In one study, 22% of mice who inhaled benzene got leukemia. In another study, the lifetime of mice repeatedly exposed to benzene was shortened by 50%. Homochirality or mirror-life extraterrestrials. So molecules are chiral when their mirror images cannot be superimposed over one another. It happens when a carbon atom has 4 different functional groups attached. If that's the case, we consider one chiral variant to be left-handed and another to be right-handed. So what's that to do with aliens? In biology, organisms always use the left-handed amino acids and the right-handed sugars. And it is not known why that is. How did it come to be this way? So it is thought that aliens could just as well be using the opposite combination. VSEPR which is supposed to be pronounced Vesper by the way for some reason, is a set of rules for predicting shapes of simple molecules. Endosymbiosis. It refers to the fact that mitochondria and chloroplasts were once separate organisms that a long time ago were absorbed by a larger cell. Instead of digestion, the two cells remained embedded in one another. They ended up so interdependent on one another that now, billions of years of evolution later, they are inseparable. There is a lot of evidence to back that theory up, but the most interesting one is that eukaryotes use 80 S ribosomes and bacteria use 70 S ribosomes. Despite that fact, even in human mitochondria, you find, you guessed it, 70 S ribosomes of bacterial origin. Elements 119 to 121 refers to the fact that it is probably a matter of time before the discoveries of next elements are announced. Element 118 already exists for less than a millisecond before decaying, so the next few are going to have even shorter lifespans. CRISPR references CRISPR gene editing. The technique is based on a defense mechanism that bacteria have against viruses. It allows scientists to cut a sequence of DNA at a desired spot. They can then add a custom sequence of DNA into the place that they cut and then seal the whole thing. All this can be done in living organisms. The discoverers of this mechanism got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2020. It is the best gene editing technique out there. Inorganic polymers. In chemistry, inorganic means not containing carbon. So polymers are almost exclusively carbon-based compounds, as carbon likes to form chains and rings, which is also the reason why organisms are based on carbon. Except for synthetic rubber, which is silicon-based, and silicon is carbon's cousin, there are very few polymers that don't contain carbon. Not sure if they have any big applications right now, but they could be the materials of the future. Probably not, though. Synthesizing meth. So I won't get into the details, but honestly the synthesis is not that difficult and there are great resources out there if you look for them. Making explosives out of noble metals is a reference to a YouTube channel called Explosions and Fire. This is one of their projects where they make a compound called fulminating gold. It is a relatively unimpressive explosive, but it is supposed to be the first high explosive discovered by humans all the way in the medieval era during the times of alchemists. Silicon-based life forms kind of loops back to what I said about silicon being a cousin of carbon. These two are in the same group and thus share similar chemical properties. It is therefore sometimes imagined that aliens could be silicon-based instead of carbon-based. Sonic hedgehog refers to a relatively important protein. Embryos of mutant fruit flies that lacked certain proteins were covered in spikes, so when the three proteins were identified, one was named Indian hedgehog, another desert hedgehog, and the third, you guessed it, was named Sonic hedgehog. Sci-Hub and LibGen refer to a group of websites that are well known to STEM students. Scientific articles can sometimes cost many dollars just to look at once, and imagine spending money on something that ends up being crappy and useless, which is gonna be the case with most of those papers. All the while, you are a broke college kid. Now imagine instead that there's a library of essentially all published scientific articles where they are available for free. This is Sci-Hub or LibGen for you. Add symbol and cloth rates are related concepts. Cloth rates are molecules trapped within larger molecules. To denote one molecule trapped within another, the add symbol is used. Triple-stranded DNA. So DNA almost always is a double helix. There exist short strands that coil up into a triple helix though. They have a few different roles and there is still ongoing research as to what they are. This is a code name for this is too complicated for me to bother reading about, by the way. Noble gas compounds. In chemistry, the noble gases are found in the 18th group and they are famous for not interacting with other molecules. They have a stable octet, so it is energetically favorable for them to just stay on their own. For example, this is why they are used to insulate a reactive substance from air sometimes. However, from the 60s onwards, we know that it is physically possible for these elements to react with some other elements. Olympiadae. So this refers to an insane molecule which is shaped like the Olympic rings, and the thing is, it is very unusual because the rings are interlocked within one another, like, you know, physically interlocked. It is very cool, and I especially like the Wikipedia article, which says it was not made with any particular use in mind. Carborane acids. This refers to a group of similar but very unusually shaped compounds, which are all superacids. It's not just any superacids, by the way. These are probably the strongest acids out there, being a million times stronger than sulfuric acid. Island of stability. So, as we've talked with elements 119 to 121, these so far undiscovered elements will probably be going to have shorter and shorter half-lives. However, within the so far discovered super heavy elements, there are some that are more stable than would be expected. This is sometimes applied to yet undiscovered elements, so for example element 126 is predicted to be unusually stable. You know, probably nothing crazy and it is still going to fall apart in milliseconds, but still more stable than expected. Who knows? Solid nitrogen refers to the fact that nitrogen can take a lot of different forms when it is solid, so you know, when it is cooled or put under extreme pressure. These have a variety of different properties, but honestly not sure if anything is really of practical importance. Genetically modified babies already born. Yes, this is a big one. So this whole thing is also known as the He Jiankui affair, named after the scientist responsible.
Two beautiful little Chinese girls named Lulu and Lana came crying into the world as healthy as any other babies a few weeks ago. The girls are home now with their mom Grace and dad Mark. Grace started her pregnancy by regular IVF, with one difference. Right after we sent her husband's sperm into her egg, we also sent in a little bit of protein and instruction for a gene surgery.
So the guy approached two parents, one of whom was HIV positive. With their consent, the parents went through IVF, with the zygote being genetically modified before being implanted into the mother for pregnancy using the aforementioned CRISPR technique. The point of the modification was to make the babies HIV resistant so that they would not be born with it. There were overall 3 such babies born, so one pair of twins and another baby, through 2018 and 2019. Eventually, the Chinese government realized what He was doing and arrested him. The CRISPR technique is not perfect, and humans have 2 copies of each gene. This led to the 4 copies shared between the 2 girls, each being different. One girl probably did not become HIV resistant, as one of her copies remained unmodified, and for immunity to be reached you need to have 2 copies modified. Another issue is with off-target errors. It means that it is unclear if targeted gene was the only one affected. If another gene was accidentally affected, the girls are likely to face health consequences. Obviously, the main reason why this is all fucked up was that the girls did not consent to undergo this potentially dangerous experimental treatment. Immortal cells taken from women without her consent refers to the HeLa immortal cell line. So cells normally cannot divide indefinitely, and those that can form immortal lines. The HeLa cell line came from Henrietta Lacks, a patient with cervical cancer in the 1950s. The cancer cells were sampled from her, and originally they were of interest to researchers because they divided very quickly. Like, she literally had super cancer. Eventually, it was also found that each cell had the ability to divide indefinitely. Lacks eventually died of cancer, but her cells were used extensively for research and still are used to this day. Because it was the 1950s, nobody bothered to ask Lacks for consent about her cells being used for research. The cells contain a triplet of chromosomes, unlike the humans who have a double set of them. They have 80 chromosomes compared to human 46. Raman nanoparticles refers to the Lycurgus cap. The Lycurgus cap is perhaps one of the most insane Roman artifacts out there. On the surface level, it is a stained glass cap encased in an ornamental metal cage. This itself is a pretty big deal, and it is considered to be the only so well preserved Roman cage cap. However, what is far more fascinating is the cap's almost magical property. When the glass is lit from the back, it has a vibrant violet color, but when it is lit from the front, it has a dim green color. The reason for this property is the presence of silver and gold nanoparticles within the glass. It was probably made on accident, and because the workshop worked with silver and gold and had some contamination on their tools that they used to make the glass. Disodium halide is another one of those previously mentioned noble gas compounds. I guess this one is special in that helium is the least reactive of noble gases, I believe. Tachyons are pretty much an insane concept in theoretical physics. They are essentially particles with mass that is a complex number. A complex number contains a real and an imaginary component. The imaginary component is a square root of -1 that is multiplied by something. This obviously has no solution. Complex mass would allow tachyons to travel faster than the speed of light, but yeah, there is no proof that they exist so far. Homemade Ozone references an explosions and fire video where he built a cheap, extremely unsafe and cursed ozone generator. Novichok proposed structures. Novichok is a Russian nerve agent. Research into Novichok and other poisons was done in the 70s and up to the 90s. It became infamous after it was used to poison people inconvenient to Putin, more specifically Sergei Skripal in 2018 and Alexander Navalny in 2020. The Russian government claims that they're in the possession of the most powerful nerve agents known to man. Their chemical composition is not fully known, but it is known that they're organophosphates. RNA later theory loops back to the RNA world and abiogenesis. The theory states that RNA was not the first chemical of life and that in fact it evolved from some other, more simple polymer of nucleotides. This would be very interesting because unlike RNA, that other simpler polymer would have to have gone extinct completely later on. Quantum dots. To quote Wikipedia, quantum dots are particles a few nanometers in size having optical and electronic properties that differ from larger particles due to quantum mechanics. It is really out there and well beyond my comprehension, but at the same time they seem to have really simple property that when hit with UV light, they emit a light of certain color, and that they are 20 times brighter and 100 times more stable than traditional fluorescent markers. What is very interesting is that the dots are what I believe spurred the Bill Gates wants to put a microchip in your ass conspiracy theory. So Bill Gates and Miranda Gates Foundation gave a grant to a research project which was studying the idea of putting quantum dots into vaccines as a means of bookkeeping who got which injection. So this was to be used in third world countries where conditions are so bad that bookkeeping is essentially impossible. So this of course was never implemented, and like there are a lot of objections that one can raise. I personally wouldn't like that to be used, but you know, not a microchip. And yeah, anyway, that's nevertheless, I'm pretty sure where the conspiracy comes from. Knot theory. This references applying knot theory from mathematics into chemicals which form knots. So this would include molecules like the olympiadine that we talked about earlier or certain proteins. Guy synthesizes cubane in his garage. This again is a reference to the Explosions and Fire YouTube channel. So the guy is attempting, and has been for like a year, to synthesize cubane. This is an impossibly difficult and surreal challenge, like I cannot stress this enough. Cold fusion. In an experiment in 1989, two scientists claimed to have achieved cold fusion. The idea was to replicate the process of thermonuclear fusion, which is the same one that makes our sun so damn hot. But you know, it only occurs in millions of degrees of heat, not in controlled conditions. So if their claim was correct, we would have amazing cheap energy. It would be like nuclear power, but would yield more energy, it would not require rare and expensive uranium, and it would not leave behind any radioactive waste. Needless to say, the claim was bogus, they never managed to replicate anything since, and you know, it's completely discredited. Aluminium and water equals fuel. Okay, so this one has to be discussed in conjunction with future batteries will contain urine and with self-cannibalizing drone parts. So it is one of the weirdest things on this list for sure, and just a weird rabbit hole. Okay, so hydrogen can be used as fuel, and it will probably be a main fuel source in the future. The reason is that when you burn hydrogen, the only product of combustion is water, so it's super eco-friendly. The thing is, it is relatively difficult to obtain hydrogen gas to use as fuel, and this is where this rabbit hole comes into play. So there is this military contractor working for the US Army who claims that he will be able to provide super cheap hydrogen. And how is it obtained? Through putting aluminium and water. Supposedly, the specific nanostructure of aluminium that this contractor invented makes aluminium act as a very efficient catalyst for the production of hydrogen from water. If this is legit, it is great, and it means that probably the technology will be coming very soon. The thing is, I get cold fusion vibes from this. So there is a legit patent that the contractor filed, but I don't know, I think that you can file patents for whatever. I'm not sure if it needs to be working, and so far the patent has not been approved. It is still pending since 2019, right? Another one is that there is no proper scientific paper that they published. What they did publish, however, is this promotional material, and this is where it gets so sketchy that oh my god. I need to add, this is 2019, but using 2009 graphics. Like, when I was in middle school, I was making better presentations. They could have hired me to do theirs, honestly. So yeah, it would be very exciting, but I am so deeply skeptical, and I think that this is just, you know, cold fusion 2.0. Anti-helium. So antimatter is a pretty weird thing. For example, nobody knows why it is so much less common than regular matter in the universe. Also, when matter and antimatter meet, annihilation occurs and pure energy is released. Anti-helium is the most complex element made out of antimatter that we have made so far, and obviously it is very difficult for researchers to work on antimatter since, you know, it annihilates regular matter. Downloading $400 textbooks of LibGen without VPN. So this one will be relatable to anybody interested in chemistry. I mean, it is not relatable to me though, I would never do such a thing. Iodine, 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 iodine. This references polyiodides. Remember Vesper? If you do, better forget it, because what you are about to see will physically hurt you otherwise. So iodine can form very strange structures like this one or this one or this one. MIMAS refers to mechanically interlocked molecular structures. Actually, we've seen one already. The Olympiadine is one such structure. These can be more complex and unusual, and one example is the Borromean ring, which has 3 interlocked components. Manganese in water-splitting complex evolutionarily links plants to sea-bottom rocks. So the water-splitting complex is an important part of photosynthesis. It is a complicated enzyme that through solar energy and a manganese active site splits water. This is necessary as a source of electrons, and it is also the reason why plants release oxygen. The claim is taken from this Wikipedia passage. It is suggested that the evolution of the water-splitting complex was triggered by the presence of the manganese-containing minerals rancieite and hollandite in the early oceans. The minerals were, it is presumed, assimilated by the early cyanobacteria, which have incorporated them in the active center of the complex. I do admit it is a bit of a stretch. Meteoritic amino acids. So we can specifically look at the Murchison meteorite, which contained a lot of organic compounds embedded, like in the rock. Most interestingly, there were amino acids, diamino acids, so 2 amino acids linked by peptides, and components of nucleotides present inside that meteor. Of course, these were just monomers and dimers, I guess, but it is still interesting as it lets us know that some basic building blocks of life can be formed spontaneously in space. Genetic inspectors. So here we find the first meme entry. It is a reference to civilization Alpha Centauri. Synthesis involves violating Montreal Protocol. This is a reference to Explosions and Fire YouTuber again. He once bought an antique fire extinguisher and smashed it open to get out carbon tetrachloride. This once popular chemical, and by the way a very powerful solvent, was banned by the Montreal Protocol in the 80s for being too destructive to the ozone layer. Sarin synthesis. Sarin is a very powerful nerve agent. Like Novichok, it is an organophosphate. However, unlike Novichok, we do know precisely what is its structure. It is most infamous for being used in the Tokyo subway attack in the 90s, where a cult named Aleph killed 12 people and poisoned thousands more. Honestly, the whole story is pretty insane, and its perpetrators were executed quite recently in 2018. Protein discovered by Nazis and named after Hitler. This one is made up.
We made this one up.
Wikipedia article proves life as we know it began before the sun was formed. This is a reference to the Wikipedia article about hemolyphin. To clarify and give credit to the people who wrote the Wikipedia article, it does openly admit that the claims made by the researchers were never published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Anyways, this loops back around to the meteoritic amino acids. One group of researchers claims to have found an entire peptide or protein within a meteorite. The claims of that group are honestly bogus, as they speculate that the protein had an iron oxide grouping that somehow was able to split water by absorbing photons, which would give that protein a source of energy. Basically, if their claims were somehow real, it would be a very good explainer of abiogenesis and would essentially be the missing link between alive structures and not alive structures. The best part is that the meteorite would have been formed before the sun was born. Sadly, this whole thing appears to have been a pretty shoddy piece of research, as it was never published once again. And to quote from the Wikipedia article, Lee Cronin of the University of Glasgow stated, "The structure makes no sense." Assassin's Creed Mostly Possible. This one is referencing epigenetics. Acquired traits are not inherited, right? If your parents know how to step dance, you aren't gonna be born a step dancer. This is 99.9% true because it overlooks epigenetics. Throughout one's life, the sequence of DNA will not change, unless, we count mutations, but ignore that. However, the DNA will be modified in other ways, through proteins associated with the DNA. It can get methylated, acetylated, etc. This influences whether certain genes will be translated into protein more or less. In other words, it influences gene expression. When sperm and egg cells are made in meiosis, it is ensured that epigenetic modifications are wiped clean, but a tiny fraction actually persists. Therefore, a tiny portion of one's acquired traits is actually passed on. Sadly, this does not make Assassin's Creed Mostly Possible. YouTuber synthesizes antihydrogen. This one is false. Although I think that Explosions and Fire is gonna get on that once he's done with Cubane. Grade F synthesis. So Grade F is an extremely powerful mixture of opioids, more powerful than heroin itself. It seems to be a real thing, but honestly, it could just be an urban legend. For example, if it doesn't have a definite structure and is instead a mixture, who really gets to say if it is grade F or not? I would say it's semi-legendary. Novichok real structure. So, to get to that level of knowledge, you need to work for the Russian government in a very particular capacity. Chemistry YouTuber to defense contractor pipeline. This is yet another reference to the Explosions and Fire YouTube channel. So the guy quit YouTube for a few months one day. The see you later video contained a bunch of cryptic information that a schizophrenic or a YouTube commenter could connect to draw the conclusion that Explosions and Fire guy is going to design weapons for the Australian deep state.
I'm doing a PhD, so my PhD is technically in physics, not chemistry, even though I did my undergrad and honours in chemistry. My PhD is in the physics discipline. Previously, I haven't really talked much about my PhD project. I haven't really shared a lot of information, and today is going to be no different. It is partly funded by people who have an interest in national security, and they don't really want me talking about things. They don't really even want me publishing things a lot of the time. So talking about that on YouTube is not really the go. Also, more urgently, I actually have an internship coming up. It's not that common to get an internship during a PhD, but here I am doing one. I will not be talking about what I'm doing at that at all. And I'm not even going to tell you where it is at, because the place I'm working at is a big fan of not talking about things.
So that concludes the chemistry iceberg. I would be very grateful if you subscribed